Hi, this tutorial follows on from our interior sketch that we were developing up and looks at some of the details for that. So if you remember, we did a sketch of the inside. We're going to look at how the structure at the right hand side of that image might be developed. So I'm going to start by kind of sketching out the rough shape, and I'm doing this in section, so elevation. So I'm not using perspective for this view. So the first thing to do is to try and put in all the basic shapes, try and get the relationships right for all the main elements. So we have our structural column with the secondary structure, the purlins coming down, probably a wee bit too small, and then we've got a kind of line outside which is meant to be the line of the glazing. So we want to kind of map those things in to try and get as much of a relationship between the various elements as we possibly can. And I'm going to kind of avoid trying to draw the roof at this moment. I'll try and sort that out another time. But I'm thinking about the bottom. How does that low wall that sits around the building work? In the view, I had maybe about 300, 400 millimeters up from the finished floor level before the glazing. So I'm kind of trying to work that out. And one of the main things to think about is how do we actually take that wall down to its own foundation? It needs a separate foundation from the main structure. So it's probably going to be a little strip foundation, and in this case I've kind of sketched out an upstand wall, which could be an in situ concrete wall. Now obviously our curtain wall framing runs with the glass, but we're kind of kicking off at a different angle. So I'm thinking about some way of connecting that down, some sort of upstand bracket that we would get a blacksmith or a metal worker to make, and then a flashing from the outside for the weatherproofing, which could be glazed into the curtain wall system, and then that kicks out into a little drip. And then we need something for the kind of inside finish to work on. And that could be a preformed element, and that little space between that allows us then to get some insulation. I'll put a wee question mark there just to say I'm not entirely sure how that would be finished against the window. The next thing we can do is sketch in all the variety of levels in the floor, and I'm thinking this would be a concrete floor with some kind of floor finish onto it, with insulation underneath it. And then we can go on and look at the outside ground levels and how they might meet. And obviously I haven't drawn in things like a DPC or underbuilding, and probably my foundation's way too close to the surface, but really I was kind of limited by what I was trying to show. I was not too concerned about scale at this stage. I'm just trying to figure out the relationships of the various elements next to each other. So I find it useful to draw these things out in 3D just to check what the various relationships might be. So I'm thinking there the concrete wall would have a little chamfered top on it, depending on how it was shuttered, and then we would have our little cranked footing plate, which would take the bottom rail or the vertical rails of the curtain walling. I picked a bit of an odd angle to draw this from. I should have actually drawn it probably from the outside looking in, because the angles are a bit too close, but I can still kind of understand what's going on. But it's maybe not the kind of clearest thing, and obviously there's a vertical post for the curtain walling to put in. But it starts to help me to kind of understand how the various layers of the construction would be, but I'm not 100% about that. So we can move on and look at what the column base does. And one of the most useful things you can use is Pinterest, far more useful than Google Images. You get targeted images. You can search for specific terms and create boards. So I've created a board called column bases, which can give you some pointers. An important note there is that these are precedents. You're looking at them to learn from them, not to copy from them. So we can look at some examples from that and say, okay, well, I kind of want something that looks like that or has that aesthetic. So we can then sketch something out to look at it. And Pinterest's good for details as well. You can actually get quite detailed drawings out of that. So most columns have some kind of flat base plate with bolts which carry down into a concrete foundation. Sometimes they're J bolts, and to that there's usually some form of connector. If it's a timber structure, we usually like to use a steel connector down at the bottom. They're easy to fabricate, they make nice strong connections, and we can splice them into our timber post. So I'm thinking about a kind of pin connector there, so it's a couple of fins that come down and there's a hole where an interlocking pin comes through. And then underneath that the floor finish would sail through. And because we want to kind of isolate the floor finish from or keep the inside of the building warm, the insulation layer has to be a continuous layer. And I'm thinking, okay, well, what I'll do is I'll have my foundation starting down there, and then I kind of change my mind and say, no, actually it can start further up. We can run a slab up to a kind of effectively a pad foundation, or the top of a pad, and we can then take our DPC DPM and wrap it around the top of that foundation before the plate goes on, and effectively have two slabs, one on either side, with a continuous layer of insulation over the top. And that would go down into its own big foundation, that element there. And I think it's important when you're sketching things out to try as many different options as you possibly can. The last one's a pin foundation, which has a certain amount of rotation allowed to it. It may be that in conversation with the structural engineer, we might need something which has got a little bit more rigidity. You might choose different ways to do things for different aesthetic reasons. So we can look at something like a kind of cruciform thing in 3D. So we kind of try and sometimes it can be a wee bit difficult as you find out this is an awful drawing. It's difficult to draw something in 3D which accurately represents what you've just drawn in 2D. And you shouldn't be kind of reticent to sketch just in case you get something wrong. It's just really you're trying to get information out your head. So if it's an awful sketch, just do another one. You've got one sheet of paper. You don't have to have one drawing on it. You can have lots of them. And actually, drawing things out a second time can give you a lot more scope to explore things. So this drawing, I'm actually starting to set it out properly. I'm thinking that these fins would actually come from each corner of the plate underneath the column and step out, and would have a wee welded joint going up, and they would have a thickness and they would be bolted back up into the column. Possibly not bolted, actually, it's maybe a wee bit weak. I think if I was going to draw this again, I would probably look for a slightly different option. But again, it goes down onto a plate as it does before, and the foundation would be put in there. So that's about as far as I would take this sketch detail before maybe moving into 3D or into CAD. But the important thing is that in a sketch, you're trying to figure out how all the parts will go together. You shouldn't necessarily worry about scale. I'm going to try and continue around the interior sketch and provide some other details. So thanks very much for watching. And if you've got any comments, please let me know.